Hello, I'm Fred Stella, President of the Interfaith Dialogue Association. Welcome to another edition of Common Threads. No American city was more important to the Nazis in the run-up to World War II than Los Angeles, home to Hollywood, the greatest propaganda machine in the world. The Nazis plotted to hang 20 prominent entertainment figures, including Al Jolson, Charlie Chaplin, and Samuel Goldwyn, drive through Boyle Heights, the Jewish section of the city, and machine gun as many Jews as possible. Also, blow up defense installations and seize munitions from National Guard armories along the Pacific coast. Sound a little bit wild? Sound like a movie that is yet to be made? No, actually, this is history, and it comes from the book Hitler in Los Angeles: How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. Last week, we began our conversation with Professor Stephen J. Ross, who is the author of this book. And today, we continue that conversation. A little bit about Dr. Ross. He's a professor of history at the University of Southern California. He received his degrees from Columbia, Oxford, and Princeton. Professor Ross has written extensively in the areas of working class history, social history, film history, and political history. His first book, Workers on the Edge: Work, Leisure, and Politics in Industrializing Cincinnati, 1788 to 1890, was adapted for the screen by Cincinnati Unionists and made into the documentary They Build the City: The Working People of Cincinnati. His second book, Working Class Hollywood: Silent Film and the Shaping of Class in America, received the prestigious Theater Library Association Book Award for 1999. It was named by the Los Angeles Times as one of the best books of 1998 and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award in History. Professor Ross's book, Hollywood Left and Right: How Movie Stars Shaped American Politics, received a Pulitzer Prize nomination and a Film Scholars Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts. Professor Ross's op-ed pieces have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and many others. He's appeared on The Today Show, Nightline, CNN, and Fox. He has lectured at colleges internationally, and he directs the Kasdan Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life. He is also the co-founder and former co-director of the Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities at the University of Southern California. So we welcome once again to Common Threads, Professor Stephen Ross. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for having me back.
Certainly. I remember that last week I asked you a question just a few minutes before we had to end the episode, and as soon as it came out of my mouth, I go, this is way too big of a question for the last one of the show. So let's recap, if we will, just a little bit about the theme of your book, Hitler in Los Angeles.
Well, the theme of the book is Adolf Hitler becomes Reich Chancellor of Germany in January 1933 and immediately starts a whole series of laws and actions persecuting Jews. The Jewish community in America splits into two groups in how to best respond to Adolf Hitler. One group, the American Jewish Congress, believes that they have to get very aggressive and that the only way you can deal with a bully is to get in a bully's face. And so they call for an international boycott of all German products until Hitler eases his persecution of all minority groups, not just Jews, all groups. The other group, the American Jewish Committee, says that if you get in Hitler's face, he's going to double down and make it even worse for the Jews, and that the best way to get him to ameliorate his policies is by working behind the scenes with religious leaders who can speak to Hitler and persuade him. Well, they keep division, arguing back and forth until July 26, 1933, in Los Angeles. Local Nazis who call themselves the Friends of New Germany have their first open public meeting in which they announce that they're going to save America from its two greatest enemies, Jews and communists, who are one and the same. And at that point, a lawyer, Leon Lewis, who's observing all this, says something has to be done. And Leon Lewis had been the founding executive secretary of the Anti-Defamation League and had worked for them from 1913 on. He moved to L.A. for health reasons in 1931, but he still remained their representative to Southern California. And he said, enough talk, we have to do something. And what his idea was, he was going to recruit, or he began by recruiting 4 fellow veterans, because he was a member of the Disabled American Veterans, 4 veterans and their wives, and he asked them to join every Nazi and fascist group, going undercover to try to rise to positions of leadership and to send him daily reports on what they were doing. And he assumed they were up to no good. He began collecting those daily reports, and as a lawyer, he wanted to collect evidence, because he had his spies swear affidavits. He wanted to collect enough evidence that he could then bring it to the police, sheriff, or FBI and have them take over the operation, because he was a lawyer, not a spy master. The problem is he collected all the evidence, but nobody wanted to do anything. The police chief threw him out of the office, the sheriff threw him out of his office, and the FBI said there's nothing we can do unless J. Edgar Hoover orders us. And Hoover was too busy having his men monitor Hollywood writers, directors, and producers, and said, no, the Nazis have broken no laws, therefore you can't put them under surveillance. And so Lewis continued his spy operation from 1933 until the end of World War II.
The last question, by the way, that it was almost humorous, something that you just don't hear anymore. Somebody moving to Los Angeles for health reasons.
Yes.
Like, not enough
well,
smog in your diet.
Well, it's still better than Chicago.
Yeah, that's true. Again, last week, the final question that I asked you was about George Gissling. So, if you would, you can share a little bit about him, what you said last week, and then continue on, because he's one of the most fascinating people in this whole history.
Right. I have to say, of all the things I uncovered, this one, in some sense, gave me the most pleasure, because as somebody who reads spy novels for fun, I discovered that this has been, it's the villain who is no villain at all. He has been, George Gissling was sent by Goebbels and Hitler to Los Angeles in May 1933 as the German counsel to prevent Hollywood from making any anti-Nazi film, in large part because Hitler and Goebbels believed one of the reasons Germany lost World War I was because the propaganda machine in Hollywood and in Britain was so effective in demonizing Germans. And they were determined to make sure that Hollywood would not stop their ambitions. And so they sent Gissling equipped with the German import law of 1931, which said any studio anywhere in the world that makes an anti-Nazi film will have those films banned. And if enough anti-Nazi films come out of any country, all the country's films will be banned. And Germany was the second largest market for Hollywood, next to Great Britain, and so as much as they hated doing it, the moguls complied. And a year later, the studios were under attack by many religious groups, and in order to stop those calls for federal censorship, they passed their own censorship code called the Production Code that had a clause saying you can't make a movie that in any way denigrates, mocks, or attacks a foreign leader or nation. And Gissling was vigilant in making sure that no film contained anything negative about Hollywood. And he would screen those films.
Well, you mean about Germany? You said.
Excuse me. You're right about Germany. He would screen the films in Hollywood at the studio and order cuts. And so, not surprisingly, he was the most hated man in Los Angeles in terms of the moguls. And when you read the histories of Hollywood, he is the villain of that period. The only thing is, I wanted to figure out something. I wanted to see, well, he may be the villain of Hollywood histories, but how did Los Angeles society deal with the chief representative of Nazi Germany? What did they think about him? And so I started reading the social column because I thought that's where you really see what people think if they invite you to their homes, to their parties. And what I discovered is that he was by far the most popular diplomat in the city, also the most sophisticated. He spoke multiple languages. He had been educated in Switzerland at a special gymnasium that focused on ancient languages and cultures. He had a Juris Doctorate, and at that time you had to actually write a whole thesis to get that. He was just incredibly sophisticated. And I just didn't believe that a man who was this intellectual, this cultured, could be a Nazi. And as I mentioned at the very end last week, he reminded me of my father-in-law, who had been in medical school in Germany in 1933 and then was kicked out when Hitler expelled the Jews. And he went to Padua, Italy, until Mussolini expelled the Jews from medical school, and then wound up at Northwestern University in Chicago. And he remained a major German culturite, and he would hum German opera. He would quote Goethe, and one day I asked him how he could still love German culture after everything Hitler had done, and he said he wasn't going to let Hitler have a double victory. He wasn't going to let Hitler have destroyed his family, his country, and then also let him destroy his love of German culture, because that culture had been around for hundreds of years. Hitler was dead, the hell with him. And I suddenly thought, this is who Gissling is. I can't believe Gissling is a hardcore Nazi. He's too sophisticated. And so I started digging around, and I know that Gissling had been arrested after the war and was tried at Nuremberg. And so for your listeners who may be familiar with Ancestry.com, they have a sibling website called Fold3, F-O-L-D, with the number 3, Fold3.com, which is mainly military records. So I sort of explored till I found some Nuremberg court records, and then found a letter to the Nuremberg prosecutors written in 1947 by Brigadier General Julius S. Klein, the highest-ranking Jew in the army at the time, saying, this is the first and only personal testimonial I will ever write for a Nazi, and that's because George Gissling is no Nazi. From the moment I met him in 1933 on, he has continued to pass me secret information about the German economy, about the German Bund, and after attending a secret meeting in Washington in 1940, he passed me information about German war plans. Please release him. And he was released several days later. And that's when I realized, oh my God, I was right. This guy is no Nazi. And I managed to trace down his daughter, who had been born in New York, where he was a vice consul, and came with him to L.A. and lived in America till she was 13. And she filled me in the rest of the story that he had, in fact, he was a anti-Hitler German nationalist who was secretly working to overthrow Hitler's regime. His friends were the people who tried the assassination attempt later on in the 40s and failed. And he would do his day job, but while he was doing his day job, he was passing information to the Jews that he hoped would undermine Hitler's regime.
You know, you say in your book, like many in the Foreign Service, he hated Hitler. I didn't know that Germans in the Foreign Service hated Hitler.
Yes, there was. Well, according to, I had somebody doing research for me in the Foreign Office records, and he pulled all of Gissling's files, and plus other things, and I discovered, in fact, many people in the Foreign Office who thought that Hitler was destroying Germany, and that they were very quietly, because if you weren't quiet about it, you were dead. They were trying to undermine Hitler's regime and do whatever they could, and as I say, very quietly, to weaken Nazism in Germany.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Common Threads on WGVU-FM. I'm Fred Stella, and with me today is Professor Stephen J. Ross of the University of Southern California. And we're talking about his book, Hitler in Los Angeles, How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. Let's talk about this ring of spies that Leon Lewis formed. Can you just give us a couple of names and a couple of stories on them?
Sure. The first person, so Leon Lewis, because he was a veteran and had been wounded, he was both a member of the Disabled American Veterans and of the American Legion. And when he started his undercover operation, he was very shrewd. And one of the things he understood is if he did this on his own, he would simply be a lone wolf. And people could say, why are the Jews doing this? And this is a Jewish undercover operation, and people would be suspicious. He wanted to make sure that from the start, he went to his friends at the Disabled American Veterans and told them what he wanted to do. He told them that he had, in fact, recruited. He had gone to 3 men early on, 4 together, but 3 very early, people who had been veterans and had served in the war, people who had faced death, who were not going to buckle under the pressure of being a double agent. He asked them and their wives to join and to go undercover, to join every Nazi and fascist group and report back what they were doing. But before he sent them out, he also went to the Disabled American Veteran leadership and to the American Legion leadership and said, look, this is not a Jewish operation. This is an American operation, that a foreign group has come into our country and is trying to pit American against American. And this is not the way we believe in America. And we may not, every American may not love every other American, but keep it inside your head. Don't actively talk about killing Jews or killing blacks or killing Catholics. This isn't the way we operate. And so he got his operation approved with the caveat, we approve a secret undercover operation so long as you don't break any laws. And that they called it, in both cases, it was the Americanism Committee run by Leon Lewis. And so, in fact, for the bulk of his spy operation from 1933 until the end of the war, he really only had one major Jewish spy. Everyone else was a Christian. He had informants who would, send information who were Jewish, but the actual undercover operators were Christians. And yet, what's so poignant is even though they knew Leon Lewis was Jewish, they never felt they were working for the Jews. They were working for America because that's what Americans did. When any foreigner threatens an American, every other American needs to rally together to protect their fellow citizens regardless of their race, their religion, or their ethnicity. And that's what these people did. I mean, they were heroes. They risked their lives, and 3 of Leon Lewis's spies would die under very suspicious circumstances during the course of those 8 years.
Really, they did
actually,
not.
More than 8 years, 12 years. Excuse me.
They did
8
not
years
make it.
till Pearl Harbor.
I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
I said it was actually in the course of 12 years because his spy operation ran 8 years till Pearl Harbor and then another 4 years till the end of the war.
And all you have is the suspicion that these deaths were suspicious, but you have no evidence on anyone.
No, but I tell you what, I've read through enough to know his first spy that he recruited, John Schmidt, was his most important one. Because what Leon Lewis knew is when the Friends of New Germany had that first public meeting that I mentioned in July 1933, they announced to the group that their headquarters was in a place called the Altheidelberg Inn, and they said they had converted the basement of the inn into a free housing for any veteran, World War I veteran, whether they were in the German army or the American army. If they were homeless, if they were hungry, if they needed a place to shower, if they needed food, they could come to the basement of the Altheidelberg Inn and get everything for free. And the only thing they had to do in exchange was to listen to the Minister of Propaganda, Hans Winterhalter, explain the principles of the New Germany. And Leon Lewis, who had again been a veteran, and not only was he the founding executive secretary of the Anti-Defamation League, but when he returned from war, he convinced his bosses at the ADL that they needed to monitor anti-Semitism, not just in America, but in Europe as well. And for any one of your listeners who's ever been in an organization and has come up with a great idea for a new committee, well, what happened is, of course, if you come up with the idea, you have to run it. So Leon Lewis then became the international executive secretary, which meant that there was probably no one in America following Hitler's rise to power more carefully than Leon Lewis. And when he heard this offer of free housing for the homeless in the basement, he understood immediately this was the same strategy Hitler had used in Munich in the early 20s to recruit his brown shirts. He recruited, his whole early army came from veterans that had gone off to fight with great patriotism for their country, but when they came back from war, they were thrown on the ash heap of history. They were homeless, they were hungry, they had no future, and Hitler offered them free housing, free food, and an optimistic future to join him. And Leon Lewis was convinced this is exactly what the Nazis wanted to do. They wanted to train an army of disgruntled veterans, American and German veterans, and persuade them that they would join the Nazis in saving America from the communist Jewish conspiracy. And so Leon Lewis thought, okay, if they want to recruit an army, I'll give them officers who they're going to love. And so the first one he recruited was John Schmidt, who had been born in Germany. His father was a German general. His brother was a high-ranking officer. He had been a German military cadet till he was 16, and then came to America, joined the American army, fought with General Pershing in Mexico, and then went to Europe to fight against his own family in World War I. He recruited him and his wife. He recruited a man named Carl Sunderland and his wife. And what Sunderland never told the Nazis is he said I was from a German background, but he never told them he understood German. So they would speak German in front of him thinking he knew nothing, and he found a number of secrets that way. And the rest of his spies as well would simply go undercover with the idea that here are these officers, and that German people who had fought in the German army probably would align themselves with Schmidt, with John Schmidt, and the American veterans would align themselves with the American undercover operatives who had been officers during the war. And so the Germans embraced these people as men who could train others to create a German army in America, which is something the Bund talked about quietly, that they were going to train this army for the day that they kept predicting the communist Jews would rise up to try to seize control of America, and at that point the Nazis would lead an American army, defeat them, and take control of the American nation on behalf of Christian America.
And Schmidt was intentionally outed, am I correct? Would that be the right way to...
Yes, well, he was discovered to be a spy. He kept denying it. He tried to fake his way through. And after he testified in court against the Nazis, they swore they would kill him. Openly in court, they said, "We will kill you." And so Leon Lewis didn't want him to do anything anymore. But he would send Leon Lewis information from time to time. And in 1940, I think, I can't even remember now from my book, but I believe it's 1942 or early 43, Schmidt was supposed to go to Washington to testify in a federal case. And wasn't it interesting that right before the testimony, he comes down and dies of some kind of stomach ailment? Well, the week before, a British undercover operative had died of the same stomach ailment, quote, and they did an autopsy and found poison. Now, I never found out if they did an autopsy on Schmidt, but his wife kept demanding the DA do an autopsy, that his wife kept saying he was poisoned, he wasn't in good health until then, but is it just coincidence that he dies a week before he's supposed to go testify in D.C., and that somebody else dies of the same kind of illness? And in that case, they found out he had been murdered. But Schmidt, there was never a final decision made about him. But I'm convinced the Nazis carried out his threat. And one of the ways I'll tell you I believe it, is I interviewed Joe Roos's son, and I interviewed Chuck Slocum's daughter, the chief spy, and Joe Roos would become Leon Lewis's associate spy master. Neither one of their children knew anything that their parents had done. And I will tell you this, no one ever leaked the story. The Nazis had sworn that they would kill if they found out you were working for the Jews. And as they even said to Schmidt once, if we find out you're working for the American government, we will beat you to within an inch of your life, but we won't kill you because you're being a patriot for your country. But if we find out you're working for the Jews, you're a dead man. And so when he winds up a dead man, you have to say there's a good chance they carried out their threat.
That's very possible. And you say that his wife begged for an autopsy, but no one would give it. That's
right.
And do you suspect some sort of collusion there?
Well, here's what I will tell you, that the police and the sheriff's departments were, members of the police and sheriff's departments were involved in a number of these plots. We know that large numbers of police and sheriff belonged to the Klan and belonged to the Silver Shirts, who were the American fascists. They were like the American Nazis. And so, yes, I believe that they would have at the very least turned a blind eye to all of this.
Stephen, we're down to the wire for this episode of Common Threads today, and I want to thank you so very much. This has been absolutely fascinating, both this week and last week as well. And I wish you the very best of luck in the book, and I hope a lot more people are made aware of this.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
You've been listening to Common Threads on WGVU. I'm Fred Stella, and Professor Stephen J. Ross, Professor of History at the University of Southern California, has been my guest, and we've been talking about his book, Hitler in Los Angeles, How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. Please join us again next week here on WGVU.